welcome to this first edition of We Talks, brought to you by the World Energy Council. I'm Etna Trainer, your host for this session, and in the coming months we're going to present you a series of rich and diverse and very dynamic conversations that will explore what's really going on when we navigate the energy transition. Now, as well as what's happening with producers and consumers, we're going to be taking an in-depth look at what's happening with societies, communities, indeed what's happening with humanity. And in this series, we're going to make sure that we will bring together different voices, new perspectives, and fresh ideas. So I'm really excited to be here with you for this. And I'm even more excited for this first edition of We Talks to welcome the Secretary General of the World Energy Council, Angela Wilkinson. Angela, thanks so much for being here.
It's a pleasure to speak with you again, Etna. Greetings from a sunny morning in Oxford.
Well, thank you so much. And of course, we do need, I think, in light of what's been going on in the first half of 2020, we really need to look back, look forward, and just see what has the impact of COVID-19 really been when we look at the energy sector.
Well, the impact is significant, and it's also highly uneven. And from the World Energy Council's perspective, we think it's really important to put it in context of what was happening before, what's happening now, and what might happen next. So even before the crisis hit, there was already a build-up of global stresses on the global energy system. Many companies were expecting a global financial economic recession. We had the climate change momentum still increasing, and we also had what we call the rise of the social energy agenda. Questions around who was going to shoulder the costs and who would have access to this bright new energy future. Now we are surveying across the world in over 100 countries, and we're finding that all energy firms and all energy sectors have been impacted, of course, by this incredible health crisis. And companies are putting people first. They're also having to manage really tight cash flow, and they're also making significant changes in what we might call in how they're going to make future investments. What will come next? Well, no one really knows, and it's too early to say, but many people are talking about the new normal. And this new normal has different perspectives on it. There's no new normal or single new normal for anyone. So moving forward, it's not going to be possible to predict the price of energy or the shape of the energy system into the future. But instead, what we're trying to do is help firms and governments navigate different scenarios around what will come next, what might be that new normal, and how can they stress test their exit strategies.
And indeed, if anything, I suppose it's going to show how just resilient we are and how resilient we have to be, and perhaps at times how, unprepared parts of the sector have been. But talk to me about We Talks, and talk to me about really the importance of this. Why did you decide that this is a good time to introduce We Talks to the world, and what do you really hope to achieve in terms of the future of energy and that dialogue?
Well, I hope We Talks will help remind us that at the centre of the energy debate, of course, are people and humanity. I want to put humanity back at the centre of the debate about energy transition. Not a technology-centric transition, not a price-centric transition, but people-centric energy developments. I'd like us to help move beyond the technical jargon. I often think in the energy world, we don't do ourselves any favours because we tie ourselves up with impenetrable technical jargon that nobody else can understand. And I want to address what is happening. We're seeing this increasing fragmentation of many different actors all engaging in energy transition, but this is creating its own set of gridlock. This is beyond vested interest. This is just a whole ocean of different actors who might not be pointing in the same direction, and we need to work out how we pull them all together. I want to see a debate that doesn't polarize between energy versus the climate, energy versus the economy, but talks energy plus, energy for better lives, for new livelihoods, for a healthy planet, people, planet, and prosperity. The ambition of energy for humanity involves humanizing the energy debate, and that means bringing new and different voices in, opening up the dialogue beyond the usual suspects, not just CEOs and ministers. We hear that from them a lot. I want to hear about those who are being impacted by transition. And I hope most of all that We Talks will build a new excitement, not energy as a bad, but energy as a good. for humanity.
And absolutely, because when you think about it, energy impacts just about, it impacts everybody in the world. But when we hear about the energy transition, a lot of people tend to be looking at the destination. Where are we all heading? And I think many people are aligned on that. But sometimes you would think maybe the destination is not the biggest eye on the prize that we should be looking at right now. Talk to me about that.
Well, it's always good that humanity has new and higher ambitions. So the destination is important. If you don't know where you're going, it's hard to know whether you're going to get there. But at the World Energy Council, we have ambition to tackle the two biggest, greatest challenges facing humanity: the need to meet universal human development goals at the same time as progressing climate neutrality goals, whilst recognising that demand for energy is still growing across the world. In fact, it's set to double in the next couple of decades. So we can't just focus only on climate, we can't just focus only on universal development, nor can we just focus on the demand challenges. We've got to address these connected challenges. Now, energy systems have been changing for centuries. I mean, we talked about horsepower, we've talked about steam power, we talk about the era of fossil fuels, of electrical power, of nuclear power, and now we're talking about renewable energies. And in the transition that's been happening in the last few centuries, we've not stopped using anything. We use all these different energy technologies and resources. And we have to recognise that energy transition is a long-term and complex process, which is also very socially messy. It requires a structural change in the system. And it involves a combination of technology and non-technology innovation. So not just talking about new technologies, but also talking new behaviours, new actors, new institutions. Those are all part of energy transition. The biggest debate in the last couple of years has been about this process called global energy transition. Now that's a whole new, higher level of human ambition. And for us, it's not about quick fix technology solutions or the should do of the destination. But for the World Energy Council, it's focusing on the human level and the how to achieve these two greatest challenges of universal development and climate neutrality, whilst engaging with regionally diverse energy systems and enabling access of everyone to clean, affordable and reliable energy solutions.
I think what you say there, Angela, about access for everybody. I mean, we talk about that new demand that's coming on board. We also look at the global situation in terms of energy poverty. But what you're talking about too is different energy sources and indeed access for everybody. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation from now on. It's a very dynamic environment, isn't it?
It is, and there is a danger that often we polarize between this conversation of end of the world and end of the week. The climate versus development. I mean, this has been going on for at least 30 years. I started my career at the time when the sustainable development agenda and the climate change issues were just rising up into global consciousness. And even since the 1970s, we've seen development discourse displace climate change conversations, and they've sort of fought each other. And this is really not the way forward. So we've got to think about how do we connect these challenges of human development, climate change, and increasing demand for energy. Because after all, the end of the day, it is about people's need for energy. We're expecting 10 billion people in the world in the next couple of decades before we hit global population peak. They're going to need double the amount of energy we use today. And this is what I call the energy demand tsunami. The basic access gap is still large. There's still 850 million people across the world with absolutely no access to modern energy at all. But basic access, we know, particularly in this COVID world, is not going to be enough. Basic access at best gives people access to energy for lighting. It doesn't give them access for clean cooking. It certainly doesn't give them fridges. It doesn't give them energy for buildings and hospitals and factories and travel. And there's a myth that the digital economy does not need a lot of energy, but look at how much energy we're using just for Zoom calls. It's a lot of energy. So we want energy not just for the material or the basics, we want energy for dignity and also social justice. On average in America, people in America use around 300 gigajoules of energy a year. Bit of technical jargon, that's equivalent of having 300 laborers working for you. In Japan and Europe, we're using about 150 labourers worth of energy a year. But if you go into the other regions, it's often less than 50, at best 80. And that's not enough for dignity and for the quality of lives and livelihoods that 1 billion more people need. And it's not just a poverty issue, as in the developing and emerging economies. In France, I hear that during the winter, 20% of the population have to choose between heating and eating. So we have to get to grips with, as we try and accelerate global energy transition, the social costs of energy are going to increase, and we have to make sure those are fairly shouldered and shared. And we have to really address this access gap where people demand to quality energy access, not just basic access.
So I would imagine you would think it's time to look at this perhaps in a much more holistic way than perhaps we've looked at it in the past. And of course, you have worked in the energy sector all your career. You have several publications, you have books, you've worked in the corporate world, you've worked in academia, you've worked for organizations. Just to kind of have a quick look back perhaps in terms of the great things that have changed, within that, and where we really need to look at it now, because we have to look at this with different eyes.
Yeah, when I started work, the big discussion was around coal versus gas. There was a really great excitement about gas being the new clean bridge to the best energy future. But the challenge was, how do you get gas-fired electricity plant licensed where there's already an awful lot of coal-related emissions? So the big discussion was about gas versus coal. And gas price was coupled to oil price, and the US was an importing energy nation. Now the discussions have switched to renewables versus gas. And we're seeing a decoupling of the oil and gas prices, and the United States is an exporter of energy. So the world of energy has changed, and the ways in which we use energy, the way we live our lives, how we want to be able to access energy is also changing. We want more mobile access to energy. So the outlook for energy is that we're going to see a greater energy mix. We're going to see more electrification of uses, and we're going to see new integration and storage challenges. But there's also a huge amount of confusion. When we speak about energy, most of the time people are actually talking about the electrical power sector when they get very excited about the rapid acceleration of renewable electricity generation, where they're only talking about 20% of the current energy system. 80% of the system is not electrified currently. Now, even if we can accelerate the pace of electrification using renewables, we're still going to end up in 30 years with about 60% of the energy uses non-electrified. And we still have to take care of those. So we need to start thinking about renewables needing friends. There's a lot of excitement today around clean hydrogen. And we at the World Energy Council, we're pushing for a level playing field so that developing and still emerging economies can help shape the rules of the game around the global hydrogen energy vector. The new energy future can't be achieved without new energy society, without people diversity, and without new skills as well. And so it's really important that we pay attention to these human level and people dimensions of moving energy transition faster than ever before.
And also, I get the feeling that it's also about bringing more people into this conversation, because I think we've all listened to so many presentations about what's going on, but we've also seen in the last few years a real divide happening whereby, we're beginning to see the us and them. I think we've seen that in the last few years. And I think this is rather dangerous when we're looking at this energy transition, and particularly at a time when we really need, and that demand for energy is so important. And of course, at the World Energy Council, you're looking right across the entire energy spectrum, just as you're saying there. How can you shift that conversation and that dialogue?
I'm never sure who is them and us when people use that type of language. I often try and think, which side of the debate am I sat on? And I find time and time again that the World Energy Council, we're not sat on either side. We're trying to bridge these different perspectives. Let me go back to when I started work. When I first started work, I was shocked, out of university, fresh with my degree, really inspired to try and make a difference in the world. That's what motivates me as a person, not money, but real common good. I was shocked by the strident language that was used in everyday parlance in business and government. And to me, it was the language of war and sport. And let me be clear, global energy transition is not a war to be won. No one can come first, but we certainly all can lose big time together. So I'm listening all the time for a change in the vocabulary we use around discussions of energy transition. And I think We Talks is part of changing that vocabulary and recognizing that the vocabulary that we use is moving towards language like regeneration, flourishing, thriving, circularity, hybrid, coupling. It's more ecological or nature-based than it is engineering and technology-based. Now, that doesn't mean to say that we don't need to use words like innovation. That's still important. And we also need an unprecedented level of cooperation. And that requires us to bring different perspectives together and to create a shared vocabulary so that we can actually understand together what is going on and learn with and from each other. Now, these terms, innovation and cooperation, are also changing. Innovation is not just about new technologies. It's also about policy innovation. It's about behavior change. It's about social norms. We've seen that even in this crisis. We've seen a lot of conversation about people, behavior, and the resilience of systems that comes from the social and the human side, not from the technology or just the financial side. And that's true of energy transition as well. And then the cooperation word needs to change. It needs to broaden. It's not just, we're not going to achieve global energy transition just by talking to ourselves within the own silos of the energy sector, and not just by bridging across the different silos of the energy sector. We also have to talk to other sectors of the economy, to buildings, to agriculture, to transport. And we have to think about, how do we not just think about global versus local, but how do we also think about how do we align change and enable transition across global and local levels, recognizing the reality of regionally diverse energy systems and the need for different energy pathways. So I'm hoping that we can stop this polarizing language and this language of war and the language of sport and competition, and start thinking about what's the language that really helps energy for humanity.
And really, it is about humanity, and it's about making sure of that access and making sure, I think, that people understand and realize the benefit of energy for everybody. It's so important, and I think it's going to be a very, very exciting series of conversations to bring so many people into this. And of course, the variety of different people that we are going to hear from too. I'd like to maybe put it to you and ask you, who should be taking the lead? Or should anybody? What about, is it government? Is it the private sector? And we look around the world, I know everybody's at different stages, but who should be taking the lead? What's going to shift this?
I mean, this is really the crux that everybody talks about. It's as though there's somebody else. We just need to sit back and wait for the right person to take the lead. And the unfortunate thing about energy transition is it is a complex and a really messy process. And no one is in control of energy transition. No one can see the whole system. And that's a scary, and it's also an empowering idea. We can only understand the system by trying to change it. And we can only change the system by really working together. And for that, we have to convene a new and much more diverse set of what we would call energy ecosystem actors. That's not just consumer and producing governments, it's also about the suppliers, but most of all, the new and shifting aggregators of demand. Some of those are in the digital economy, some of those are communities, some of those are cities. Cities are huge energy consumers. They're not energy experts, but they will fundamentally reshape global energy transition. And we need to learn with and from each other, sharing the lessons that we're learning, whilst avoiding not reinventing the wheel. There isn't a big, grand blueprint or green print global strategy that we can just cascade down using roadmaps. We're in the road building business, and the landscape is continuously changing. I tend to encourage people to think of the Starship Enterprise analogy, where when you look at them, they were making this bold endeavor to go boldly, I think is the misphrasing, to go boldly where no one has been before. Well, that's the global energy transition challenge. We know there are challenges today, but fundamentally, this is about energy for the future of humanity. And like the Starship Enterprise, what they have on the Starship Enterprise is the ability to rehearse their actions under different contexts and different situations so that they learn how not to make terrible mistakes before they act, knowing that nobody can predict what's going to happen. And that's what we're doing in the World Energy Council. We're bringing together different stakeholders, a much broader and diverse set of stakeholders, and we're getting them to rehearse new and different energy experiences, because those experiences give us the practical wisdom, the know-how to really facilitate a global energy transition that benefits everyone and the environment.
And naturally, with anything new will come challenges and risk, without a doubt, within there. But as you say, yes, we have to take those bold steps. But we're beginning to see some cooperation and stronger cooperation. And I think we look at the shift in the international oil companies. I mean, things are definitely shifting. And I know, you authored a book, Realistic Hope. Mm. And perhaps this is there's a mindset shift that a lot of people probably have to have as well. Talk to me a little bit about how encouraged you are in terms of seeing the transition, in terms of people changing their focus, their outlook, because there's a lot going on at the moment and a lot of good is happening right now.
Well, we wrote Realistic Hope as an antidote to the usual perspectives of optimism and pessimism that tend to get used in terms of the thinking about the future. And I remember when we were talking about Realistic Hope, I was inspired by Rebecca Solnit's book, which said, hope is not a lottery ticket that you clutch while you're sitting on a sofa. It's an axe that you use to break down a door. So Realistic Hope is about how do we actually think about how we create that axe to break down the challenges of global energy transition and open the door that helps everybody move to the next stage. Now, when we were developing Realistic Hope, we found that they're everywhere. People are trying to translate inspirational new visions of better energy for all into reality. There's no shortage of human ambition. It's just the gap between human ambition and action has become much bigger. And when we looked at examples of how people are making really large-scale system changes happen across energy, across cities, across war, across in conflict, in leadership, in many different situations, we found there were 5 principles, and we used those principles at the World Energy Council to work with Realistic Hope. The principle of diversity, the power of who is in the room, the principle of dialogue, how do they interact, the principle of experimentation, what do they do and how do they continue learning? Systems thinking is another principle. How do we understand where we stand in the energy transition? How do we understand how to intervene in energy transition? How do we think about the impacts that we're having? How do we approach our problems? And the last principle is about how we make use of the future in a very different way than the way we've been making use of the future in the past. Energy futures has tended to be about price forecasting or technology predictions, but now we have to make use of the future before it happens. And we have to think about our ability to co-create a better energy future, which is different from the past. So we can't rely on prediction and we can't rely on evidence-based projections alone. We have to work out how do we rehearse those different futures together and work out what does that mean for the actions we can take today.
And indeed, I think when we look at the position we are now, we're at the start of a new decade, 2020. It's been a bit of a rough start already in terms of the last few months here. But when you look ahead to the new decade that we're in, what do you think are the key challenges that the industry really needs to be grappling with? I know you've outlaid some of them, but if you can sort of bring them all together to us, what are the challenges?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is that there are so many people who are looking for a single issue quick fix approach, and they're not joining the dots and they're not working effectively with other people. They speak the language of cooperation, but what they really mean is quick fix. Now, the World Energy Council, we've been building a truly global energy community for nearly 100 years. Now, community building takes time and patience and persistence efforts to put down deep roots and to create a trusted sharing context for practical wisdom that comes from shared experiences. So we're not a pop-up shop, we're not a single issue advocacy group, we're not a think tank. We're trying to work out, if this is the ambition, how do we get there? And to work out how do we get there inclusively, making use of all technologies available and engaging with regional diversity as reality, understanding that national energy systems are different, but that regional energy pathways might also differ. We're trying to think about how to engage with the community as a whole so that we're an open community, we're inclusive, we're neutral and impartial. We try to think about less us versus them, as you talked about, and more we, a pragmatic global community of know-how, not the should do, but the can do and the how to. And we have to promote and facilitate a more open and better quality global energy dialogue between citizens, communities, companies, and countries, recognizing that there are new and more diverse actors engaging in energy transition beyond the energy sector. And that we also have to include the voices of those who are going to be most impacted by global energy transition. And so we're looking, the challenges I think today are not that we don't lack technologies. The challenges aren't that we lack finance either. There's plenty of capital in the world. The question is, can we collectively decide what is the right thing to do as we exit from this unprecedented health crisis? Can we do the right thing to avoid not just a climate crisis, not just to cope with an economic recession, but also can we do the right thing to avoid a new energy crisis, recognizing that we're going to get a doubling of demand? So these are not simple 7-second soundbite issues. This requires a grounded community and a good quality conversation and equipping leaders with the tools and bring together cooperation in a way which really focuses on the how to, not just the should do. There's so much should do talk, there's very little how to action.
And of course, in light of all those challenges, I think it's a really good time for us, and I'm very excited to be involved with We Talks. But again, that conversation that you talk about, and I know it's a word that you really stress, and it's an all-embracing word in many ways to make sure that many people are around that table having that conversation. What do you hope that we're going to bring about from We Talks and this initiative from the World Energy Council in the months to come?
Well, let me just take that word conversation and let's think about how it often gets confused with discussion. And I remember someone wise person saying to me, do you know the difference between a discussion and a conversation, Angela? And I said, no. So they said, a discussion, think about it as percussion. It's like beating a drum. You beat it backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, drumming. And we have a lot of discussion going on in the world about global energy transition. And a lot of it is informed by discussion of reports. And in those discussions, we're looking at who's right and who's wrong. A conversation is something that's very different. A dialogue is about exchanging different perspectives and respecting them. It's about turning ideas, conversation, turning ideas over together. And we believe at the World Energy Council that as a community, a diverse and open, inclusive community that brings together all the different stakeholders across all sectors of the energy system, across all parts of the value chain, and increasingly reaches out to users of energy as well as other sectors. We believe that that quality of conversation is essential and that we are trying to improve it by moving away out of the technical jargon, out of the usual talking heads of just CEOs and ministers, to including these new voices of people impacted by the energy transition, of communities, of citizens, of companies outside the energy sector, of new and shifting users. And we hope that by changing the conversation, by including those voices, we'll find new and better solutions. And more importantly, the social proof points that we're going to need to move further and faster together. We can't do this just through plug and play technology. We can't solve it just by throwing a lot of money at it. We're going to have to work global energy transition by being able to improve the quality of conversation and include more voices and perspectives in the how-to global energy community movement.
And indeed, this was very much the conversation that we've had about doing We Talks. And it's a real honor for me to be with you, to be doing this series as well, about bringing more people in. And I suppose finding more harmony in it. This is absolutely so important. So I really want to thank you for doing this first edition of We Talks. Angela Wilkinson, the Secretary General of the World Energy Council. Thanks so much for your insight and your great experience and knowledge, and for opening up this first session for us.
It's a pleasure, Etna, and I know we're in good hands with you. You're always a good person to get the conversation going. And I know we can together engage more hearts, hands, as well as minds, and help us move further and faster together. So We Talks is open.
Is open indeed, and a big thanks to all of our dear colleagues at the World Energy Council, the great work they've put into this. We're going to be in touch with many of you out there in the coming months. We're listening to what you've got to say, and we want to keep that conversation open and alive. So stay in touch with the World Energy Council. You won't want to miss it. We'll be bringing you up to date with what's really happening as we navigate the energy transition. I'm Etna Trainer. Thank you so much.